We all know the archetype. They walk into a room, and the air doesn't just shift, it sort of vibrates with this compressed potential.
They're this singular, terrifying force, almost like a perfect engine of destruction, capable of things that just shouldn't be possible for a normal.
Exactly. And they're often the most powerful person in the story. I mean, technically, they should win every single fight they're in.
But that's the setup, is that raw power is just the stage for the story's real tragedy.
How so?
Well, because despite that immense external capability, internally they're just so profoundly vulnerable. They're basically running on psychological...
Right, so they're fighting this deep, pervasive sense of powerlessness, but only in their own lives.
Exactly. We're talking about the character whose very existence, constant devastating paradox.
Okay, so let's really unpack that central contradiction. The living weapon is an archetype defined by this unmatched capacity for destruction.
But they're constantly grappling with their core internal sense of self.
Yeah, they're the character who forces that ultimate existential question, not just on themselves, but on us, the audience. Who am I now that I can kill everyone?
Or what am I if my entire definition is just reduced to a function? It's a terrifying thought.
So our mission today is to do a deep dive into that extraordinary narrative tension that underpins these characters.
We're going to be exploring some recurring themes, power, personhood, agency, and I think ultimately the nature of sacrifice itself. And we're using examples from some incredibly diverse source materials.
We really have. We've brought sources ranging from the just brutally calculated vengeance of Lynn and the Ishermen,
all the way to the heartbreaking post-war journey of Violet and Violet Evergarden, and then you have the neon-lit tragic hubris of David in Cyberpunk Edgerunners.
And what connects all of them is that core conflict. They are so powerful, yet they feel completely powerless to determine their own destiny.
Right. Their strength often acts not as a source of freedom, but as the ultimate heavy shackle.
And this conflict, it seems to force them down a few distinct narrative paths.
It does. They either become the weapon willingly, choosing the transformation as a means of survival or maybe vengeance.
Or they're manufactured. They're made into a weapon by others, forcibly molded by a government or a corporation.
Or, and this might be the most terrifying path, they're a weapon without even realizing it. They're just a ticking time bomb waiting for someone to push the button.
That journey from human identity to instrument, or the long, painful road back again, that's where all the narrative gold is buried.
It really is.
So let's start with that first one, that really chilling choice, the character who basically initiates their own destruction.
This is where we get into the realm of characters who see their self-mutilation as a form of freedom.
We're calling this section the sacrifice for agency, when a character weaponizes themselves.
And this is maybe the most difficult archetype to relate to because they refine themselves into a weapon, not out of a necessity that's forced on them.
No, they often see it as a necessary, if tragic, improvement.
Exactly. It's a warped, almost desperate way to seize control, to declare ownership over the one thing they feel like they still possess, their own capacity for violence and for efficiency.
And the prime, absolutely devastating example of this deliberate self-molding has to be Lynn in Tiana Napa's novel, The Ishermen.
Oh, for sure. Her journey is one of conscious, almost surgical erasure. She targets her own identity like it's an enemy state.
It's not just that she gets physical upgrades, right? She performs this exhaustive, permanent mental and emotional self-mutilation.
It's methodical. The source details how she just systematically erases her history, her memories, her childhood, and crucially, her family.
Anything that could possibly foster empathy.
Right. Or, even worse, impede her vengeance against the occupying force. For Lynn, memory itself isn't just a weakness. She literally calls it pain. It's an inefficiency that has to be excised from this.
And to really understand the depth of that erasure, you have to look at the details the source gives us. She wasn't just, forgetting her past.
No, it was targeted. She was going after sensory input, emotional anchor.
The source mentions she worked to forget the specific sound of her father's execution, the smell of the spices in her childhood village, even the feeling of a non-combat touch.
She needs to be incapable of relating to humanity because relating means vulnerability. And in her world, vulnerability means death. That's a sacrifice that just cuts right to the soul.
And that's all before we even get to the physical alteration.
Which just compounds it. She modifies her body with this integrated combat system, which makes her lightning quick and deadly, and it lets her achieve her goal.
But the system is inherently unstable, isn't it? It risks killing her prematurely with every single high-stress use.
It does. The weapon she chooses to become is always on a self-destruct timer. Her transformation isn't an upgrade in the traditional sense. It's a finite resource. She's burning through it, and she knows it's going to end her.
So when she's asked about what she sacrificed, things that we would consider fundamental like morality, love, free will, what does she say?
She just dismisses them as trivia.
Trivia.
Yeah. She treats them with this incredible disdain, comparing them to, like, first-year philosophy debates that have no bearing on the physics of her existence.
So for Lynn, these are just burdensome impediments. They get in the way of survival, of victory, and most importantly, of vengeance in this brutal reality of Vietnam under occupation.
And this is where we find that really warped sense of age. Lynn lives in a world where genuine democratic free will is, it's clearly impossible for her.
So by becoming a weapon, she carves out a powerful, sort of elegant place for herself in the machinery of conflict.
She asserts herself not as a victim, but as, and this is a direct quote, merely the instrument of that language violence, like a calligrapher. She's choosing to be defined by the only thing that seems immutable and real to her, which is destruction.
But I have to challenge that definition of agency. If she sacrifices free will, if she systematically removes her capacity for alternative choices for emotion, how can that be true agency?
Well, that's the thing.
Isn't she just a highly specialized slave to her own vengeance? She seems to have traded one form of bondage, external political oppression, for another, which is this absolute internal programming.
That is the core tragic insight the source provides. Lynn's choice is not freedom. It is mastery within a cage.
Okay, say more about that. Mastery within a cage.
She gains efficiency and power, for sure, but she loses the capacity for self-determination. She chooses the identity of the weapon because, in her mind, a weapon has a clear, understandable purpose.
Unlike a human being caught in the chaos of war.
Exactly. So she trades that messy, painful human agency for a clean, powerful, destructive purpose.
We see a similar, though maybe less calculated, more impulsive tragedy unfolding in David Martinez from Cyberpunk. Oh, definitely. He takes these extreme, risky upgrades to his body, most notably the Sandevistan.
We should probably clarify for listeners who haven't spent time in Night City what the Sandevistan is.
Right. It's a military-grade cybernetic implant. It gives the user incredible speed, essentially creating a kind of localized time dial. So David moves faster than anyone can react.
It's immense power, but it comes at an immense cost. The neural feedback is so intense, it requires these heavy-duty trauma blockers, and it leads directly to irreversible cyberpsychosis.
And David's initial motivations, unlike Lynn's cold vengeance, are actually...
They're good, right?
They are. He takes the risk to protect his friends, his crew. He's trying to find purpose, maybe even glory, in this utterly repressive dystopia that is Night City. He wants to be a hero, not a tool.
Problem, sources always highlight, is hubris.
It's always hubris. David's good desires are what ultimately destroy him because he harbors this dangerous delusion that he's different, he's special.
He believes he can continually choose power, adding more and more chrome, more systems, more risk, while somehow retaining his personhood.
He's convinced himself that he's strong enough or unique enough to escape the cyberpsychosis that he sees consuming everyone else who goes too far.
He seems to think his love for his friends, for Lucy, is the shield that will protect his mind. Exactly. But the technology doesn't care about his feelings. The more chrome he adds, the more he uses the Sandevistan, the more addicted he becomes to its efficiency.
And the more he needs the chemical dampening that's just eroding his self-control.
So his good intentions only accelerate his transformation into the very thing he sought to protect his friends from. He becomes a weapon, a liability, and then eventually just another victim of his own power.
What's so fascinating here is that in both of these cases, you have Lynn's calculated coldness on one side and David's desperate idealism on the other. The action of giving more of themselves over to the weapon solves a massive plot problem.
Oh, absolutely. It achieves survival, it gets the vengeance, it provides for their crew in a world that wants to kill them.
But it instantly creates these immense, debilitating personal anxiety. They face alienation, they lose their sense of self.
They become utterly dependent on the very violence they're supposed to be wielding, and they both face an early, inevitable death. The character solves the world's problem, but in doing so, they create a personal catastrophe.
So the tragic resolution is almost baked into the premise of self-weaponization.
It has to be. They might achieve the endgame of the plot, the successful hit, the final revenge, but they ensure their personal narrative ends in disaster. They've sacrificed everything that actually mattered.
Their humanity, their relationships, their future, all gone.
And that tension, that acute understanding of the personal cost versus the external achievement, it only gets heightened when we look at characters who didn't choose this path, the ones who were forced to become the...
Which is a perfect transition. Let's look at the character who didn't choose to improve themselves through violence, but who were forcibly molded into a weapon by some greater, often malevolent entity.
This is section 2, the manufactured tool finding humanity after the war ends. And the quintessential example of this transition has to be Violet Evergarden.
Violet's background is just devastatingly clear from the start. She was raised during the Great War, treated as nothing more than an asset.
and trained into the perfect soldier, a ruthless killer, capable of destroying entire platoons on her own. She believed her only value was derived from her efficient following.
Legally, the source material notes she was, and this is a quote, not even a person, just an extension of her owner, a tool.
That, I think, is the bleakest definition of a manufactured weapon. Tool, an object.
And the narrative challenge posed by Violet Evergarden is so brilliant because it removes the entire context for her strength. The war ends.
Right. The environment that justified her existence and her skill set, which is killing it, just vanishes over.
So she's no longer needed for combat. How does she define her? She's left staring at this horrifying question. Am I still a killing machine? Or am I just a killing machine? And what does that even mean in peace?
That technique is such a fantastic way to explore identity. You intentionally take away the one thing a character defines themselves by.
Their core strength.
Yeah, and you just see what remains. You force this radical identity shift. For Violet, she is forced into a new role, the polar opposite of a soldier. She becomes an auto-memory doll.
Let's explain that role for the listener. An auto-memory doll is basically a ghostwriter.
But more than that, they translate people's raw emotions and thoughts into eloquent, beautiful letters. It's an intensely intimate, emotional, and social job.
So it fundamentally challenges every single assumption Violet holds about herself. Her new battlefield is a typewriter.
And the skills she once relied on are completely recontextualized. Her ruthlessness, her literal interpretation of orders, her unempathetic nature.
All huge strengths on the battlefield.
Now they're liability. They almost cost her the job repeatedly. She fails because she just cannot understand the nuance of human connection.
There's that one time she gets an order to write a love letter, and she writes something that's just utterly cold and clinical.
Because she couldn't interpret the feeling behind the words. She only understood the order. But here's the turning. Her meticulous attention to detail and her unwavering dedication to her soldier's discipline, that finds a new...
So those skills do find a new home.
They become the way she slowly begins to thrive in this new context. By observing and listening and transcribing the emotions of others, she's forced to vicariously experience
Loss, profound love, trepidation, wonder.
Exactly. She slowly and very painfully begins to understand the words she once only... She gets a new way to imagine herself outside the confines.
This theme of memory and humanity is just so central to the living weapon narrative, and it actually brings us right back to Lynn's sacrifice. Lynn views memory as pain and weakness, something to be erased for efficiency.
But the very source that introduces Lynn gives us this profound counterpoint through another character, the resistance fighter, Tiana Napa.
What does she say?
She asserts that without memory, we lose the vitality of our... So memory, in this light, it's not merely pain. It's a vulnerability, yes, but it's also the connection to our core self.
It's the scar that reminds you of where you've been and why you're fighting.
It's a weakness.
If you are conditioned to believe that your pain is a weakness, then of course you'll seek. But if pain is proof that you were once alive and capable of deep feeling, then its removal is just self-annihilation.
And this whole discussion of authenticity and memory brings us directly to K in Blade Runner 2049.
Right. K is a Nexus 9 replicant, designed specifically to be a hitman, a highly specialized tool used to hunt and kill his own older models.
And K initially operates under the belief that humanity is defined by the biological, by being physically born of a woman, which he knows he is not. He's a manufactured product.
But the real discussion of his identity shifts away from that, doesn't it? It shifts to memory and whether it's possible to feel something authentically, even if the stimuli are...
Yeah, that's the core question. K is given fake implanted memory. It's standard practice for newer replicants to keep them pliable and focused.
But he starts to question his purpose. When one of these supposedly fake memories feels overwhelmingly real and personal, it motivates him to seek out its source.
And this is the massive philosophical problem that the living weapon trope highlights so well. If our feelings and our perception of reality can be entirely manipulated,
if the pain or the love we feel comes from a line of code,
does that make the emotional response itself a lie? Kay's struggle is the existential dread of knowing his feelings are probably fabricated, yet still acting on them, still sacrificing.
And what's fascinating there is the beautiful irony. The replicants, the manufactured tools, they're often the ones driven by hope and wonder and self-sacrifice.
They appear infinitely more human than the cynical, detached, often cruel human character.
So humanity in these stories isn't something you're born with or genetically entitled.
No, it's something we give each other. It's a context of empathy and connection that the living weapon, by definition, has usually been denied.
They're raised in isolation and their purpose is singular.
And this is where we touch on that poignant idea from the source material that what is more human than wanting to be witnessed before we shuffle off this mortal coil?
The manufactured weapon must be noted. Their action, their very existence, even their inevitable death, it has to hold meaning for someone else.
Otherwise, they truly are just a tool that rusted and broke. That desperate need for a witness is the need for confirmation that they were, in fact.
And that profound need for connection and witnessing is often the external trigger, isn't it? The thing that ignites the internal time bomb of their conditioning.
Absolutely. Which brings us to a huge moment in the living weapon narrative, the breaking point and the narrative opportunity.
This is section 3, the instant when the emotional and moral architecture that conditioned the living weapon finally shattered.
The snap. And it's usually triggered by an external catalyst, something that completely contradicts their core, often abusive program. We can look at the extreme case of Dahlia in Milo James Fowler's The Last Human Child.
Dahlia was molded from birth to be the ultimate weapon,
Right.
deployed to end an apocalyptic war.
And she was successfully conditioned. She carried out horrific atrocities against the enemy forces, the other. Her creators, the human elders, used severe emotional and physical.
But they framed it as necessary training, as this rare and precious love she had to earn to survive and save the world.
Exactly. But the breaking point wasn't a surge of conscience or guilt. It was a sudden, shocking act of kindness from the enemy.
So what happened?
Dahlia was captured by Brunstone, a genetically engineered enemy creature. And instead of treating her as a weapon or a prisoner, Brunstone showed her unexpected kindness. He gave her a choice. He offered her food without some kind of test. He treated an injury she had gently.
For a character conditioned to believe she was only valuable as a killing machine, who had to earn every moment of peace through violence, this would radically recontextualize her entire existence.
It forces an inescapable question. If this is what real, genuine kindness looks like, what does that make the abuse I suffered at the hands of Mike?
This dynamic perfectly mirrors patterns we see in extremely abusive family structures or cult-like environments.
It does, where the victim reframes the trauma and control as a necessary, if harsh, form of love. The abuse is justified as, they were only hard on me because they loved me and wanted strong.
And the snapping point is that devastating realization that pendant love they desperately clung to was never real.
Never. It was always just a mechanism of control. The internal house of cards, built on self-justification, just collapsed violently. Suddenly, the weapon sees its entire past not as service, but as slavery.
And we see that immediate aftermath in Dahlia's reaction, which is this desperate need to self-flagellate. She says something like, "I killed the elders. I deserve to be hunted."
Yeah, they should kill me for what I did. It's that reflective desire to take the blame, to shoulder the guilt because she believes she deserves the violence that is suddenly no longer rationalized.
It demonstrates their fundamental struggle with power. They're physically powerful, yet they realize they were even more powerless in their own lives than they ever thought.
Yeah.
They couldn't even rely on the twisted love of their abusers to be genuine.
And the snap forces the character to recontextualize all the violence. It's no longer for the good guys. Suddenly makes Dahlia a murderer, not just in the eyes of the world, but more importantly, in her own.
The moral architecture, however twisted, was the only thing holding back that crippling guilt.
And we often focus on those violent, high-stakes snaps like Dahlia's sudden outburst, but the quiet snap, they can be even more complex and devastating because they're purely internal crises.
Absolutely. You just have to think of Shinji Ikari in Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Oh, definitely. He's ordered in the most devastating way possible to kill Kaworu Nagisa, the one person who showed him unconditional acceptance.
And the resulting moment isn't some bloody fast massacre. It's a minute-long, silent, still shot of Shinji holding Kaworu in a strangling grip inside his gigantic Evangelion unit.
Just hesitating before carrying out the order.
That paralysis, that fear and profound personal brokenness of a person coming undone all at once, seeing the moral cost of obeying an order that cuts off his only source of human connection, it's just excruciatingly powerful.
It shows how easily love and connection can be weaponized against the living weapon, and how dangerous it is when they're stripped of the one thing that sustained them, leaving them completely paralyzed by choice.
Now, a key narrative challenge arises immediately after the living weapon snaps and decides to switch sides. They are, by definition, an objective power within the story. So if they suddenly join the heroes, they often render the rest of the team irrelevant. And writers, struggling to maintain tension, often nerf them.
The classic unlocked bad guy problem, like in a video game where they're suddenly nowhere near as cool or capable as they were when they were the villain.
And that just dampens the character's unique capability and wastes their narrative potential.
For sure. The sources suggest 3 really strong narrative methods to maintain tension without reducing the character's core power. The first is to give the living weapon challenges that completely negate their unique strengths.
Like Violet Evergarden. Her strength is precision and efficiency, but she needs to write a letter expressing deep, messy sorrow. Her physical power is used.
Her emotional lack becomes the primary obstacle. Her fight isn't with bullets, it's with metaphor.
Okay, what's the second?
The second is to structure combat with multiple simultaneous objectives. An overpowered character can only be in one place at a time. So if there are 3 critical tasks, say disabling a weapon, rescuing a civilian, and broadcasting a countermeasure,
The character can only solve one, which forces the rest of the ensemble to step up and be heroes in their own right.
exact. And the third, which we touched on with Lynn and David, is to make the use of their power inherently dangerous.
So the Sandevistan risks accelerated psychosis, or Lynn's combat system risks her own life.
Right. This creates a moral dilemma about whether the cost is worth the involvement, keeping the tension high without reducing their core ability. The choice not to use the power becomes an active, heroic rebellion against their conditioning,
They choose humanity over efficiency.
which is a far richer narrative dilemma for a living weapon.
Moving into Section 4, let's step back and examine the thematic backdrop, the organization, the world, or the villain that actually engineered the living weapon in the first place.
Because their specific personal journey is always a reflection of the larger social and political traumas that created.
Lynn's story in The Instrument, set in Vietnam under Chinese occupation, is a perfect, devastating microcosm of this. Her personal suppression, the deliberate erasing of memory.
It acts as an analogy for Vietnam suppressing its own traumatic, centuries-long history of resistance against countless the Chinese, the French, the Japanese.
And the sources note that this history is often suppressed by the patriotic or nationalist narrative, a kind of collective lie that's required to unite the people and move forward. But what's the cost of that suppression?
Nappa's work really highlights the warning. Suppressing historical trauma, just like Lynn suppressing her personal memory, is not an effective way to thrive or build a healthy identity.
It's merely a way to, what was the phrase, sleepwalk into the eternal present.
Yeah, and in doing so, losing the vitality of our If we forget the specific, messy details of our past, we're just doomed to repeat the cycle, conquered not by force, but by a lack of historical self.
So Lynn's failure to find peace reflects the impossibility of resolution in a world that's still caught up in those cycles of vengeance and violence.
And this external trauma created by the architects of the weapon is often mirrored by a profound personal violence. We can call it bodily.
This is what makes the living weapon so unique compared to other victims in fiction. Their body or their mind is fundamentally used against. It leaves them with little sense of privacy or boundary.
They're not just victims of circumstance. Their very flesh has become property. Freedom for them isn't just about making choices. It's about carving out a sense of privacy and recovering ownership of their own body,
which has been modified, controlled, or programmed for these external purposes.
This brings to mind Margaret Atwood's description of Offred in The Handmaid, who feels so alienated from her own flesh, separated from the instrument that is her reproductive.
Right. She describes her body as a cloud congealed around a central object, more real than I.
Atwood captures that separation between the self and the instrument perfect. For the living weapon, whether it's Violet's prosthetic arms or Lynn's unstable combat system, the recovery of infinity is often the physical recovery of their own.
And the difficult reestablishment of boundaries, putting up those walls of privacy they were never allowed to have. Their bodies stopped belonging to them the moment they became a weapon.
And when we look at the architects of their pain, the Alliance, the Tyrell Corporation, the Elder, we have to discuss the mechanism by which they operate, the passive nature of cruelty. The source material notes that dehumanization is often done passively and unthinking.
That's a truly profound insight because it shifts the locus of evil. If dehumanization, treating a person like a thing, is often passive, the default state,
then humanization requires active effort and choice. And the human mind, especially the minds of those in power, is incredibly adept at rationalizing systemic cruelty.
This brings up the concept of the delusion of compassion. The source describes a dystopian story where the corporation that creates synthetic human life holds these extensive emotional interviews for their creations to potentially grant them rights.
But they will never grant those rights. The outcome is predetermined.
So why do they toy with them? Why waste the time?
Because they need to soothe their own conscience. They convince themselves that by offering a superficial opportunity for rights, they're being fair, and therefore what they're doing, maintaining slavery and control, is somehow acceptable.
It's the cruelty of the seemingly decent masking systemic abuse with a veneer of compassion.
And it's a perfect analogy for how large, powerful institutions today can engage in performative empathy, public apologies, internal committees, while maintaining the oppressive structures that benefit them.
The living weapon character is facing this cognitive dissonance every single day, which makes the greater evil even more insidious.
It's far easier to fight an overtly malicious monster than to recognize the cruelty hidden beneath an organizational delusion of benevolence.
That ability of the world to shape and define a character against their will carries us straight into Section 5, variations of the weapon trope. starting with the Chosen One as a weapon.
The Chosen One is, by nature, forged into a weapon. They're shaped by powerful entities or destiny or fate for these cosmological conflicts they had no real say in.
They're just plucked out of nothing and used as tools in a greater war. It's forced weaponization on a cosmic scale.
A great example of this is Serapio in Rebecca Roanhorse's Black Sun. He's chosen as a vessel for the Crow God, molded by ritualistic scarring and blinding that begins.
So this is a cosmic version of the physical and mental alterations we saw in Len and David, a profound, non-consensual bodily transformation that grants incredible power.
And the typical Chosen One arc is, rising to meet the challenge, accepting the role, and ultimately wielding that power to save the world.
But what makes Black Sun so compelling is that Serapio's primary arc is about escaping that destiny.
It focuses on the intense personal cost of letting go of that immense power and breaking the chains of become the simple human being you want.
That's a powerful narrative shift. The true heroism is abandonment, not acceptance. It reframes the power as the ultimate burden, not the ultimate.
Exact. Next up, we have the unknowing weapon, like River Tam in the Firefly universe and the movie Serenity.
This variation creates this incredible mystery and tension because the character's terrifying power unfolds so slowly.
And the audience often knows exactly what they're capable of because of flashbacks, even if the characters around them have no idea.
River is continuously hinted at being a deadly, highly specialized weapon created by the Totalitarian Alliance. She's a sort of ticking time bomb planted directly on the ship. The tension builds because we know that at any moment her conditioning could just override her fragile, damaged personality.
Her body and mind have been programmed for extreme violence, and the final unleashing of her power in Serenity is this spectacular, terrifying moment where she single-handedly dismantles an entire platoon of trained, powerful enemy soldiers with this almost balletic grace.
And yet, even in that spectacle, there is immense emotional cost. When a character who has resisted violence, who has fought for years against their programming, must suddenly give in to that violence to protect her friends, that moment of acceptance is just devastating.
She used the violence of her past. You can't really take that step back from becoming the monster they do, even if it's for a noble cause.
And finally, we have the commander weapon, exemplified by Ender Wiggin in Ender's Game.
This trope explores the weapon whose power is focused entirely on strategy and control, not physical combat. He's trained to be a godlike military leader, making him the ultimate thinking weapon.
But his trauma is perhaps the most profound betrayal of agency possible. He is tricked into committing genocide against an entire alien race while believing the massive, decisive conflict he was fighting was merely a simulation for training.
His power was real. His strategic genius was unmatched, but his perception of reality was entirely manipulated by his creators. The cost is the shattering guilt that comes when he realizes the scope of his act.
And his quiet breaking is not a vengeful tyrant, but this paralyzing realization of the gravity of slaughter. It leads him not to more violence, but to seeking amends.
His arc shifts profoundly in the subsequent novels, particularly Speaker for the Dead. Ender sets out to seek radical empathy and understanding. He refuses to participate in any further violence until he has fully comprehended the alien life.
For Ender, the most meaningful choice was abandoning the thing he had defined himself by strategic warfare to rediscover himself entirely as a truth teller and
So the living weapon narrative, whether it's through deliberate choice, forced conditioning, or cosmic destiny, it always returns to that sense. How much of yourself do you sacrifice to gain power? And how much integrity is needed to recover your personhood, even when you're capable of the greatest acts of destruction?
This has been a really deep and intense look at a character archetype that reflects so many of our own struggles with control, authority, and choice. The cost of efficiency is always borne by the individual.
Let's quickly summarize our key takeaways from analyzing these diverse sources, because the knowledge we gain here is, I think, directly applicable to understanding conflict in our own lives.
First, the living weapon fundamentally explores the struggle between external power and internal person. And becoming the weapon is often a desperate, warped way to reclaim agency in a world that is already broken.
Second, to truly explore them dramatically, writers have to challenge their core definition. They have to force them into situations where their strengths, like ruthlessness or violence, no longer apply, forcing them to adopt human traits like empathy and community.
Third, they are these brilliant vehicles for rediscovering what it means to be human, especially through experiencing things like memory, love, and loss, which they were previously denied. As Kay found out, sometimes manufactured feeling can lead to authentic action.
Fourth, the breaking point is the most powerful narrative. It's often triggered not by another trauma, but by a moment of unexpected, undeserved kindness that shatters their justification for the violence and word.
Fifth, revenge. While it's an immediate and powerful motivator, is consistently shown to be a dehumanizing force. It ironically consumes the person who's seeking agency, turning Lynn into the very instrument of destruction she sought to master.
Sixth, these characters serve as a microcosm of broader geopolitical and social. Lynn's personal self-suppression reflects historical trauma, and the greater evil is often the cold, bureaucratic world that created them and rationalizes its own cruelty.
And seventh, effective storytelling involves reflecting that dehumanization on a line-by-line level, showing the character's profound alienation from their own body and contrasting it with the delusion of compassion held by those in power who oppress them while pretending to offer a choice.
So we've learned how the ultimate fictional sacrifice allows a character to resolve the plot but almost guarantees they will lose everything personal. We know that power and vengeance are inherently dangerous, often dehumanizing forces, regardless of the
And this knowledge can be applied to thinking about conflict, choice, and identity far beyond fiction. It's about recognizing the quiet, creeping costs of efficiency.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. The living weapon narrative is ultimately about the costs of agency and the nature of the self. So if extreme power and revenge are often dehumanizing forces, what smaller, more insidious, daily sacrifices of morality, memory, or free will are you making in your own life to achieve a warped sense of agency or to merely survive your world?
What price are you paying to be faster, more efficient, less encumbered by trivia, and when will your quiet breaking point finally arrive?
Something to mull over as you navigate your own life's architecture. Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.